My brother just told me.
Jay, why are we laughing so much?
How many years, John?
I started teaching Hamlet when Lyndon Johnson was president.
And she says, I met the youthful Lord Paris at Lawrence's cell and gave him what becoming love I might, not overstepping the bounds of modesty.
No, I already did that with the other
I should
guy.
say not.
Him and Beowulf and...
But you know, when he dies, he's like desperate to be remembered. Tell my story. Remember me. Should we be doing this? Should we stop right now?
No.
Here we are, and we're back. It's Paul and Jay with Teacher Talk, and we're still going through the romantics, all right? It's not as exciting as that might sound. We're hitting the romantic poets, the British poets, mostly poets, from 19th century, and tonight we're going to dig in with who might be the first romantic writer, the first romantic poet, which I didn't really realize until preparing for this. Historians of these ideas group the romantics into sort of two groups, almost two generations. And William Blake is of the first. He's the earliest of the romantics, kind of separated from your sort of Keats and Byron and Shelley. He's a little bit older than all of them, and starts writing, publishes his first works before even Wordsworth's and Coleridge's, lyrical works that they published, lyrical ballads, maybe about 10 years before lyrical ballads is published. So he gets there first. Who's earlier, Jay?
He was also an artist and an engraver. That was like his day gig.
Yeah.
So for our students who are visual, there's hardly a poet you're going to find more vividly visual than Blake. I mean, he's actually just very sensory. Yeah. But his visual images are next to nobody. I mean,
they are fantastic. And I'm going to recommend those. I'm going to recommend those as the place to start with Blake as we get into this. Actually, yeah, so good. I was looking back through them tonight before we got on air, and I was just shocked. Like, oh man, I love each of these.
He's so good. He really, I mean, he didn't have much of an education. I think he was relatively self-taught with Latin and Greek, and he read Milton deeply. Right. And as we talked about last time, these guys can't escape Milton, so they just eventually just keep reading him. But
I remembered that you said that actually from the last episode, because I was reading about him, and there was some story of an episode of a friend of his coming by, and he stops by and knocks on the door. And Blake says, "Come on in." And he comes in, and Blake, he and his wife are in the house naked. And they're like, "Oh, we're just reading Paradise Lost." It's just Adam and Eve here. I mean, literally, they're naked in the house.
Wow. So, method reading at its finest.
Yeah, they decided they couldn't read that scene, with their clothes on.
Man, I'm glad they didn't walk in during the hell chapters of books 1 and 2. Would have been hot in that house.
But yeah, the Milton tangle. That seems to be Blake's, big influences, Milton and the Bible. But if that all sounds so conservative and staid to you, you're not thinking about it right.
No.
Blake does stuff with it that nobody else did. I mean, he's considered a radical. He's considered, crazy. I think I found a quote by Wordsworth who said something like, "I prefer the apparent insanity of William Blake to the rationalism of a Lord Byron, or the reason poetry of Lord Byron," something like that. So I think he was seriously considered. He was kind of a loner. I mean, he was married, lived in the city, lived in London his entire life. Yeah. Had brothers, so there was family in the background, but I think he was considered crazy, almost insane,
Yeah, I mean, he admits from his early childhood to have seen visions and seen people, and I wouldn't be surprised if we would view him as schizophrenic now. I don't know if that's clinically true. I'm not comfortable diagnosing real people that I know, never mind people that died a long time ago. But I mean, there's plenty of evidence that suggests that, he had something that was more than creativity. But that being said, he died in anonymity. Like, he wasn't known while being alive. And I mean, that's just such a common trope, isn't it, Paul? I mean, there are exceptions, certainly. Dickens being maybe the most famous man alive walking around, but from Jane Austen to, I mean, there's so many authors that are mostly anonymous, and Blake is one of them, until I think at some point during the Victorian era, he was unearthed again and read closely, and people realized how magical it was.
Yes, and republished then too, I think. and recognized. But that didn't stop him. You know, he lived in those visions, and reading about them, I wasn't sure what to make. Yeah, we're all tempted to diagnose. And we
Yeah,
think,
right,
you know,
right.
but I'm not gonna do that. I don't know. I think it's a part of the romantic project, if you want to call it that, to say this subject. I think he embodies the subjectivity that is at the core of a lot of romanticism, which is
Yep.
that subjectivity is the pathway to objectivity. And so if you're having visions, whatever you want to call them, if you want to diagnose them in one way or another, okay, fine. But they're real. I mean, they're real in the sense that they're actually happening. And it was
Yeah.
something that he experienced and could describe and worked from, you know. And
Yep.
so they were real things in that sense. Whatever caused them, I don't know. But it's an interesting part of the story. Well, let's dig in. Jay, I think you said you prepared a poem for tonight, but you want to save it for the end. So we'll do our customary opening poem at the end, and we're going to talk
Yep.
about poetry throughout this episode. But what we really want to focus on is, if you're running your class and you're doing romanticism, you definitely should be talking about William Blake. And we'd just like to talk through the ways that we have approached Blake. I want to talk about the way, you know, a really good pathway into Blake. Pathway I think is a golden pathway. You can diverge from it, do whatever, but we want to lay out a way that will get you in and hopefully kick off. I want to really focus on kicking off an organic, real conversation with students. That's the path I want to talk about. You know, Jay and I talk about this. I mean, the way we run our classes are this way, to draw students into real conversations where you talk like ordinary, real people about literature, as opposed to coming at them with a list of facts, of things you've looked up, of things you've written and put together that you want them to prepare for a test, like, you know, via PowerPoint or something like that.
Right.
Facts and all that are fine. You know, it's a piece of the story, but I don't really think that should be the whole story. You've got to draw them into this art. This art is real. It's meant, you know, William Blake was serious about what he's doing. He's a serious radical. I mean, he defended the French Revolution, you know, as like democracy coming to France, no matter how many people died. And he meant it as a real thing. And so I think it can touch down with students as an actual critique of human experience. And I think Blake uniquely can draw students in, Jay, as you were saying, because of the visual art, for one thing, and then because of what he actually talks about in his poetry.
Yeah.
Don't miss that opportunity, right? To do that. So how do you want to start this, Jay? What do you got? You want to start with a poem? What do you want to start with?
One of us, we each prepared. I mean, we can do a year of podcasts about Blake, so we're not going to do that unless one of you gives us a lot of money to do that, and then we'll do that. Yeah. But I think we're going to pick some just select works from all of these romantic poets and just have conversations. We're invariably going to leave things out, and I think, I don't want to speak for Paul, but we're English teachers, and that means we don't spend time writing scholarly monographs detailing all of these things. We're teaching them to kids who don't spend their time reading them generally. And we want people to access this no matter where you are. If you're in graduate school, if you're in 9th grade, if you're just curious about Blake, if you're a teacher, whatever. We would love to just open up a dialogue, kind of share what we think and feel about teaching and reading these things. But we'd love to hear what you think too. So definitely subscribe and comment. We each picked a Blake poem. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
Why don't you start us off? And, you know, and I want to emphasize this. This is the way into romanticism. You want to know what romanticism is about? I don't think you should Google it necessarily. I think you should do this. You should start reading romantic poetry and find out from the representative texts. Maybe Google that. What are the top 10 texts that are considered by scholars to be romantic texts? And then stop the Googling. Start reading the poems and find out from there. So let's do a little bit of that. Why don't you open? What did you choose as a Blake poem for a way in, you know, for a way to tunnel in?
So a poem that matters a lot to me that I learned by heart several years ago, and I have most of it still. I have to review it, is his poem London. It's written, he wrote the Songs of Innocence in his mid-20s and Songs of Experience in his late 20s. I don't think it's necessarily bad if you're introducing readers to someone like Blake to give a little bit of context.
Yeah.
Because the poem doesn't come out of the ether. But I agree with Paul that hyper lecturing and getting into the minutia, here's the thing that I fall victim to sometimes, and I'm better at not doing that now. The things I love the most, I can get so excited that I do too much talking and not enough listening.
Right. Right.
So anyway, I might mention those things to students. I might show some illustrations. There's actually in Songs of Experience, the poems are accompanied by illustrations. So
Yeah.
I think it would be valuable to see the picture of the kid looking at the worn, tired man in the street of London. As you're listening to this podcast, unless you're in your car, please don't do this. But if you're home, Google and look up the poems Paul and I are going to discuss because it'll help looking at it. So mine is called London by William Blake, and Paul's is The Auguries of Innocence.
Yes.
They're both in the Blake Greatest Hits. If he had a Greatest Hits album, these two would both be on it. So what I would do with students first is we would leave I've done this. We would leave the classroom. This poem is a first person subjective experience walking through a street in London. Yeah. So my school has a sort of campus feel, but no matter where you are, and the kid can do this in the neighborhood, is walk, no cell phone, walk, pay attention to what you see and how it makes you feel.
That's a great
idea. You make a list. You make a list. What are the things I see and what do they make me think or feel along the way? No wrong answers, anything, right? And we have a conversation about all the different things, and it's silent. They can't talk, and it's about 20 minutes. So
the walk is silent. They can't talk. They're just walking, looking.
Yeah, and they can bring a notebook and write notes.
Yeah.
So I think with difficult poems, it's good to do kind of funky, creative things, not to explain the poem first, but to get them in the mindset of the poem first. Because this poem is an 18th century version of an introspective walk. So if the kids do an introspective walk, they're obviously not going to be Blake unless they have access to really good drugs. But I think it puts them in a good position to enter the poem, which is, I think, what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So here's the poem, and I'll tell them, you're not going to know what everything means literally. We're going to read it, and then you're going to talk about the language in the poem that stands out. You're not going to interpret. You're not going to have answers. You're not going to have a thesis. What are the words or phrases that pop to you? And we'll chat. They're going to look up some words because if you don't know what words mean, you can't really read the poem thoughtfully. And then we'll revisit it. So this is a process. Here's the poem. I wander through each chartered street near where the chartered Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of woe. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every band, the mind-forged manacles, I hear how the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. But most, through midnight streets, I hear how the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear and blights with plagues the marriage hearse. So most groups of students, even high-end students, are going to be kind of flummoxed at this point.
Yeah.
So a tip is to, like I said, find language that stands out to you and don't ask why it stands out to you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You can go to the board, write it out. The kids go to the board, write it out. Start having a conversation about why they think it stood out. Like a lot of kids are going to mention mind-forged manacles.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm just.
Do they notice that line? Do they notice that typically?
Yeah. But I mean, the nice thing is, and you and I discussed this, when you're reading something really good, whatever the kids want to talk about is fine.
Yeah.
Literally any line here is weird enough that you can kind of riff on it.
It is.
So, I mean, I have my own thoughts, and this is a big teaching thing, and I think Paul and I will be discussing this a lot. Paul and I walk into the room with thoughts. It's not like we're just playing opinion goalie and keeping everything kind of in the room.
Yeah.
But I think one of the challenges of being an English teacher is how do we frame questions? How do we give them time to think, which sometimes is the hardest part because we're all under time constraints. How are we patient with their early fumblings? How do we encourage the early fumblings? And how do we move from just initial responses sort of grappling in the dark to something like insights? Like, what is all that? So that's what we're talking about.
And if you're in the public school system, how do you move from those initial things to the marks you're supposed to cover that are a part of the state curriculum or the state standard that you got to get to? The same kind of end point, you've got to reach as well.
Right. So I think the way any of us teach poetry, a poem like this, is in part based on what have we talked about with poetry. So I think one of the things that goes under discussed is prosody, is the fact that poems, even free verse modern poems, have music that's on purpose.
Yeah.
And in light of the fact that our students listen to more music than any group of people in human history, and in light of the fact that they think poetry is this encoded language full of symbolism that they don't have access to,
Yeah.
they all have access to the music. That's objective. That's not a matter of opinion.
That's good.
So I'm noticing like something that I think any state standard would ask is notice the form of the poem, the rhyme scheme we all can tell is ABAB. But
Yeah.
it also is in what we call iambic tetrameter. So it's da-dum, 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 da-dum. There's a beat, right? And
Yeah.
I like to tell my students, just like with music, very rarely is it constant. Music invariably will syncopate. Now with poetry does that usually. Great poets manipulate everything to get you to notice what they want. They want you to notice certain things. So I'm not going to obsess about every line. But what's interesting to me is we have chartered repeats in the first stanza. So chartered street and chartered Thames illustrates a sense of like state control. And a control of the hierarchy is a huge part of this poem, even on a first read. Chartered also in a poem that goes da-dum, 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 da-dum. Chartered is the opposite of an iamb. It's a trochee. It's a falling rhythm. It's dum-dum. So I would write this on the board, but I wouldn't lead with it. I would ask kids, like, what words seem to pop? And we would make a list of words in each stanza that seemed to be a focus. And almost with any, the sonnets are great for the Shakespeare sonnets. Words that he wants you to notice, he's almost always manipulating the rhythm so you land on them in a specific way. It's hardly ever like Sonnet 73, that time of year thou mayest in me behold, is the first line. Well, there's nothing really there. It's iambic pentameter. It's the perfect music. But it's, and then it immediately varies and syncopates. I don't want to get too much in the weeds on this. What I want kids to see is I want them to notice language that stands out. And the question I would ask them afterwards is, how do you think he made you notice that?
Those are great. That's a great question. And you need something really objective like that, because I think from teachers I've talked to, there's nothing harder than teaching poetry if you're teaching in this way, if you're trying to draw students into it and not simply just tell them, what the poem is saying. What do you do? Yeah. What do you tell them to, how do you get them started? So I think the things you're saying are great, and to make the connection to music, I've done that too successfully, because they all, like you say, they all listen to music. Somehow they can't find the music in poems. They think it's like hidden, like a Sudoku puzzle or something. But I'm like, no.
Kids invariably say, adults say that, do you think the poet meant that? I don't know. I can't interview William Blake. All I know is it's objectively here. And when he says, like, here's this stanza, I hear how the chimney sweepers cry. So these little boys who had a very small life expectancy, who would sweep the inside of chimneys. The chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church appalls, and the hapless, the luckless soldiers sigh, runs in blood. So it's synesthesia, right? Like, I don't give them that word. I just say, what's weird? And they say, well, how can a sigh run in blood? And I tell them that's synesthesia. It's a weird mixing senses kind of image down palace walls. But again, rhythm-wise, chimney, sweepers, blackening, hapless. These are all trochees in a poem whose music is the opposite. It's a disruption to the music, Paul.
That's
right?
Fantastic.
Now,
so you end up landing on it. You end up noticing it.
The key is the order of operations in the classroom. If I lead with it, if I'm just lecturing about what's cool about the music of William Blake, only graduate students would care. And even then, I don't even know if they would put their computers away. It really is about, to me, this could apply to any poem, but it definitely applies to this. Getting kids to notice whatever it is they notice. Asking them, what did the poet do to make you see that?
Yeah.
And then say, okay, what is he up to? That's the next thing. It isn't just saying trochaic. That's not enough. You're just noticing a thing, right? So if you stream together the images and the words and the lines you're noticing, How do chartered streets, chartered Thames, chimney sweepers, hapless soldiers, youthful harlots, midnight streets, how do these things go together? They go together rhythmically, which is how we notice them, but
Yeah.
meaning-wise, how do they relate to each other? And we could riff on that, and there's interpretations of London, and we could easily see on a very superficial level, and you could see like very mediocre senior essays about like city bad, country good, the mechanization of city industrial life bad, you know.
Right.
But
Right.
it's more than that. Like there's no one else in the Romantic period talking about size running down in blood down palace walls. Like he's the only one doing it,
Yeah. Right. Right.
you
So
know?
what's he up to? And I like that idea of kind of reverse engineering. Like allow them to find what they find and say,
Yeah.
why did you land on that? And they're very likely because the poem's good. So they're very likely to land on the things that Blake wanted them to land
And they
on.
might notice, you know, they might. So the last stanza, which is the one that has the most disagreement on, because here he says, so early on he notices things he sees,
Yeah.
the chartered streets, the Thames River, faces, and then he hears stuff, infants crying, the chimney sweepers cry, the soldiers sigh, running down blood. But then the last stanza is like the therefore, but most. You know what I want to hear? I hear most through midnight streets, how the youthful harlot's curse, the young teenage prostitute, blast the newborn infant's tear. This requires research, I hate to say, because what is the harlot's curse? Well, men who would go sleep with prostitutes and then get married, because marriage hearse is the last line. They would infect their new pure wives with, ta-da, syphilis and similar things, which when a baby passes through the vaginal canal, it can actually affect, among other things, their tear ducts.
Oh my gosh.
So it's literally, you could say like, tears not coming. There's a metaphorical resonance to that, but this is just biologically what would sometimes occur. So this is a universe where like industrialization was clearly like improvement. It's like the new iPhone is automatically good because it's the new technology, right?
Right. It's updated.
But here's what he's saying. Look closely. Look at people's faces. Blake's was the first generation to see the pallid faces of men leaving factories, not having been in the sun all day. His was the first generation to see that.
That's right. That's right.
And you want to look closely, look at all the different groups of people affected. Look at how the authorities are treating them as mindless, faceless people. And then what affects them the most is the thing that's most sacred, the marital connection, is being tainted by. And what isn't written here, and it's a brilliant omission, is why are there so many prostitutes in the 18th and 19th century? It's because if women found themselves in a certain position of life, it was their only recourse. Right. That's it. Now, it's beautiful understatement not writing it, because he could have gone on a whole a moralistic diatribe. And instead, he does what all great poets do. He gives you a vivid image and leaves.
Right. Right. And he does the diatribe in other places. He says your laws, your religions create all these bad things, essentially.
Right.
So it's exactly what.
But I think there's like very nuanced stuff. But there's also, there's also just repetition. You don't even have to speak English to see that chartered's used twice in 2 lines, and face is used multiple times. In every is used. So whenever a great artist repeats himself, I always tell students, just ask why.
Right.
Why are they saying that? When Hamlet says, when Polonius says, "What do you read, my lord?" and Hamlet says, "Words, words, words," each of those utterances means something different. Shakespeare's not repeating himself to get paid.
Yeah. Right. Not paid by the word. It's true. And it works like at every level. That whole reverse engineering thing. I've tried this. I've gone down the path with students, and you can try, you can start with like meter, but I like I've described it like concentric circles. You can keep going into the layers of organization, and they all point to the same things. I mean, you can go all the way down to like find the subject and verb of the sentence. That stanza is a sentence. Well, if it's a sentence, it has a subject, it has a verb, it has modifiers. You can do the grammatical analysis, the literary device analysis, the rhyme scheme and meter analysis, the grammar, just even basic grammar, subject and verb analysis, and then pull out and try to find so what's the big idea even. And all of these things are these creative ways of pointing pointing. And lo and behold, a lot of times, and this could be a kind of pleasure for students to find that they landed on the word they thought, me personally, I just liked this word in the poem. Yeah,
Right.
well, it ends up being in the position of the stressed syllable. It ends up being, the main verb of the sentence. It ends up being the literary construct that dominates the poem or whatever. And that is kind of a pleasure for students to discover, which is completely different than trying to teach state standard symbolism from the outside in, and say, and like declare to them that symbolism is important. How much better if they discover cynicism is a real thing, and you'll appreciate it in your own way, even if I don't tell you about it.
Yeah, and it's at this stage too, where if you imagine an English classroom for 30 or 40 minutes, this sort of conversation where you're collecting questions, problems, observations, you're looking things up, and you're asking, what am I noticing? What might that be doing there? Kids want a takeaway, right? So I would then ask that. We've collected all these things. So what? Like, what are we left with? And I'm a big fan of Billy Collins's statement that we shouldn't ask what do poems mean, but we should ask how do they move? Yeah. So where do we go by the end? We go like visual, auditory. We go through different sort of hierarchical structures. We move through different groups of marginalized people. It ends very curiously on like hypothetical married couple. So a go-to question with a poem like this could be something so simple as, is there hope?
Yeah.
Or I just think it's good to have like a wrap-up thing and to make it so that they don't feel pressure to have like a Hallmark kind of moral at the end. Because I don't know about you, I can't imagine a poet that would resist that, maybe Shakespeare, but like, good luck saying, okay, this means that like hierarchy's bad. No, I mean, he'd write an essay if he thought that. You know what I mean? I mean, essays were big in the 18th century. He's a little more imagistic and creative. So really, like, that's not all that's happening. Is there hope is a good question. You can ask. I mean, again, this is my own proclivity. If there's themes, fine. Themes just don't mean anything to me. So I would ask, what is Blakean? What is his unique way of doing that theme? So if the theme is larger sort of hierarchical structures are by definition oppressive to the individual, okay, fine. That's nearly every work of literature ever. So what is Blake? Like, let's honor the thing. What's his unique spin on that? So that's how I would try to take away. That being said, those are my ideas. I don't know what any individual class might notice or say. Those are just some possibilities.
Yeah. And you've read the poem many, many times. You've thought about it seriously. Again, that's really distant from simply reading the textbook or Googling it. It's really talking through it, putting yourself on the line. This is my reading. This is what I pay attention to. So you're ready. You're a kind of expert. You're the kind of expert you're trying to make them be. As you said, we're not writing essays in journals like college professors, but the kind of expert you want them to be is a person who reads honestly and pays close attention and brings all their reading experience to the reading. So you're bringing that with you, and then you're ready to hear the various things. And I think that, after you've read a few of these poems with students, they would become suspicious with you of any pat Sunday school holistic reading, because the poem that Blake is most known for probably is the Lamb, either the Tiger or the Lamb poems. And the Lamb sounds like that's the poem that would seduce you into maybe the most sort of almost precious Sunday school Hallmark card kind of reading. Yeah. You only have to read that one a few times to realize that you might be being played for a sucker if you read it that way. There is subtly some little traps laid in that poem, and that's a kind of pleasure, to build up to, students to discover. So you're trying to back away. So that last thing you said, you're trying to back off of the pat moralistic answer, but you're also trying to give them something like, where is this going, or what's being done here that's uniquely Blakean? Can we find that out? You want to just copy everyone else, right?
Right. And I just, at the end, I had a kid years ago say, well, the optimistic side of this is the line mind-forged manacles. And I thought, how's that optimistic? And he said, well, if the thing that's handcuffing you is created by your mind, you can also uncreate it by your mind.
Wow, that's nice.
Which is actually true, right?
Yeah.
So at the end of every class where we deeply read a poem, I read the poem again.
Okay.
So I'm just going to read it again now that we've discussed it.
Let's do it.
I wander through each chartered street near where the chartered Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of woe, in every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every band, the mind-forged manacles I hear, how the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. But most through midnight streets I hear how the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear and blights with plagues the marriage hearse.
Marriage hearse.
Yeah,
Golly.
I know some marriages like that. No, I'm kidding.
Well, reading it again after a deep read like that, I don't know how to say it, releases you to pay attention to other
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
And you
Yeah.
start, hearing other things now that you're past your initial markers or those initial things that stand out to you. That's great. Like Mind Forged Manacles, your attention lands on that so much. But
Yeah.
this time when you read it, Jay, I noticed the I hear, which is strong imagery. You hear the manacles. You don't
Right.
see them or understand them. You hear them jangling. When they talk, you can tell someone's just bound. And it's
Yeah.
a truth
I read that a bunch today, and I
Yeah.
think there's a weird ambiguity. For a long time, I thought it was the manacles being heard, but there's enjambment at the end of the line, and it could be I hear how the chimney sweepers cry.
Right. That's right.
But the bottom line is, Paul, it's not clear. I think it's your perception or mine.
That's
And
true.
he
I wasn't noticing.
leaves it. I think it's very clever leaving it because both possibilities are very rich.
Right. That's right. The I hear belongs to both. Could belong to both. Right.
Because he does synesthesia in the next stanza.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
anyway,
It's
it's a
great.
poem I like thinking about a lot. And I used to not do it, but I do the little 15 or 20-minute walk with a journal. And I don't know, I think teaching the romantics in the best of all possible worlds, if you have time, involves getting outside a little bit.
That's a great idea. As you were talking about that, there's a Catholic school not far from here down in Dayton where I live called Chaminade Julienne. And it is literally it's right downtown. It's on a city block. The school is sitting right on a city block, and they have a football stadium and everything just down the block, right all downtown. It's kind of amazing. And I was imagining, students going. I've gone and visited the school and known some kids there, and imagining walking out that door. You could just walk downtown. Just be walking on downtown streets of Dayton and noticing there'd be so much to take in. It'd be a great exercise. Great way to do it. I like that. There's so much here that is, and I think you could begin, back to our point of when you're teaching romanticism, you're reading romantic poets and trying to abstract from it. There's so much here you could abstract from, and one of the things is the apparent simplicity of the poem, the ordinary language. I don't know of any real, there's some great phrases, like Mind Forged Manacles. There's some powerful imagery. Obviously it's good, but word for word, it's very simple, Paul. I don't know of any high level, language in here. There's no rare words exactly with students. And yet from that is made some deep metaphysical thoughts. And then the juxtaposition of apparent contradictions that are typical of Blake. But I just think that profundity in the simplicity, which I think is one way people talk about lyrical ballads, which is coming, a decade after this or so, I think. Same thing is done. So you get some typical romantic stuff going. On here. So that's nice. It's nice at every level. Yeah, I like that.
What do you got, Paul?
Well,
what do you have here?
Yeah, I've got a poem, and the thing I want to say is that I'm always, when I'm teaching this poetry, you want to cover it because it's a thing you need to cover, whatever poetry it is. This year I just did Robert Frost, and it's American lit. And I felt like, a representative of American lit poetry could do a lot worse than Robert Frost. He's kind of similar. To the romantics in the sense that he makes out of very ordinary language.
Yeah.
Like his contemporary, frenemies like Wallace Stevens or someone like that, who used language you can practically not even read. He made out of that very profound poems that draw you in, lure you in with their apparent simplicity, and then and then sort of all hell breaks loose. Once you're in the middle of it, and so the Romantics do that. But I'm always thinking about how are my students going to find their way in, and I was just overwhelmed with the contemporary relevance of what's most powerful about the Romantic movement. And
Yeah.
I think Blake can draw your students into ideas. And sometimes it really only takes one author that they really connect with, and it just opens the door. Then they're just
Yeah.
dispositionally different toward all the other authors that come. And Blake might be this person. I think we mentioned this at the beginning, but I think you should begin with his plates, with his art. His art is fantastic. It looks great now. It holds up. It's amazingly powerful. Two of his really famous images are his image of Isaac Newton, which wasn't famous when he was alive, but now there's a statue based off of one of his plates of this Isaac Newton imagery in front of the British Library, the biggest library in the world, I think. So it's quite famous. It's a fantastic image to watch, to look at. My favorite one is his Ancient of Days, which is a painting of God, or his version of God from his own mythology, laying out the foundations of the world, of the universe. And it's a fantastic image. And it's a way of, you can look at that and just read it and begin to wander into the ideas of Blake. But I think the big thing that Blake does here, he is, you can talk about this in terms of ideas and movements. He's in the Industrial Revolution. He's sort of on the tail end of Enlightenment breakthroughs. There are many great things, sort of at a distance, that have been introduced into the world, from transportation, steamships and trains, to factories, which we all know now, the critique of. We've all read Dickens now, but he's living on the front end of it. He's living when there are all these, AI sort of, by comparison, breakthroughs and these amazing things that everyone were prepared to be wowed by, and probably primarily were wowed by. The understanding of the universe, the understanding of the laws of gravity, Newton and everyone who'd made these enormous breakthroughs. It must have been overwhelming. And for him to be right in the middle of it and come out with a critique that is still vital to this day is amazing. It's amazing. And he did that. He saw through it. And so I think his breakthrough for this is something that we can pitch to our own students, which is, there's always cutting edge things happen in whatever era you live in, and there certainly are in our own times. Blake pushes his readers to look inward. He's a radical, critiques politics, society, art, and everything. But his answer isn't activism. He's not out in the street. He's not burning things down or marching around with a sign or something like this. He's trying to get his readers to make changes in their own soul and their own spirit. He's trying to people into a completely different perspective. He thinks this Enlightenment perspective for all of its breakthroughs is totalizing, and in that sense is weak. It's presented a greatly reduced vision of the human capacity of the universe, of the world. It's fantastic what it's discovered, but there's so much more. And so he wants to help people find a way out of it. And if you feel trapped, and I think our students do, if you feel trapped by your own time, by their own, even the good things of your own time, you need to find a way out. Blake's there for you. And he found it for his own overwhelmingly powerful time. And I think it's still the same answer for today, which is through asking our students to examine their own subjective experiences, trying to give them some way to do it, and that's what Blake does. You're still a human. You're still able to ask, to analyze, and you need to do that instead of just retreating into what we call objectivity, but is really just radical inner subjectivity. It's just crowdthink. And now more than ever, our students are trapped in internet land and in social media land, in which it must be hard in ways that we can't even appreciate to break out of that.
Can I
So
throw
how
out
was
one
it?
thing? Can I throw out one thing dovetailing off what you just said? I think it's really a good thing at the end of any serious book you're reading with kids to ask and have them write about, why was it important for you to read this? You as an individual human being in a world, as you were just implying, that they're just literally a variable in an algorithm most of their sentient life. It is countercultural for an adult to look at them, introduce a text to them, written centuries ago on the other side of the world, and then say, I want to know you as a human being, what was it like for you specifically to interact with this? What was that like? What was it? Why was it important for you to do it?
Right.
If you were uncomfortable, what was that like? If it reminded you of your grandmother, what was that like? Whatever. I know that you and I grew up studying English in an era where you didn't use the first person, and there's certainly merit to look at literature very analytically. But I think what you're saying is if you're going to read the Romantics authentically, you need to kind of method read them a little bit sometimes and to say, you know, be Blake. So what is it like walking around thinking this way and reacting this way and making these connections?
And it's
And
kind of
if
dangerous.
you
I mean,
feel
it's a
trapped
dangerous.
by your time, that's a great writing prompt if you have a unit on romantic literature. These are people all differently, you know, Keats, Byron, Shelley, Coleridge, Blake, all of them are trapped in their own time, wrestling with that trap. That's what a lot of this literature is. So
Yes.
what's that like? You can even, I mean, we're riffing here, but like, and Paul and I talk about this. What if you did a close reading essay on any romantic poem you liked, but the conclusion of the essay was, how does this relate to your life? What was it like for you personally? Use the first person in the conclusion. You know, I don't, the challenge is a lot of teachers are not encouraged to focus on subjectivity because it's not quantifiable or tested.
Yes.
But also like
or because like from corners that I read and tend to like, it's dangerous because it's said that we live in a time of over subjectivity. Everything is subjective. There is no sort of objective world we're not interested in it. We're all interested in, and this goes back to the social media thing, just constantly querying, what did you click on? What did you look at? What do you like? And it's all, and so they think that it's over subjectivity, but it's not really.
It's a marriage of the two. I used to think they were two discrete things, and you and I have talked about this.
Yeah.
I feel really deeply that one of the qualities of a great book, whatever generation it's written in, is you can approach it subjectively and then look at whatever you feel and think subjectively and look at it objectively. So I noticed these three things in this poem. I noticed my personality and history and reading background notices these three things. That's subjective. But then you ask, I don't know, what's the poem do anything to make me notice that? Now you're honoring the thing. I don't think they're overly discrete. I think they can be married together.
The subjective thing becomes an object to analyze and to try to find the other real objects in the world. And then when you find, especially as a 14-year-old, you're reading this poem and you realize, oh yeah, William Blake was a real person who was smart and actually was probably smarter than me. That's a realization you come to. You realize he got there first, and you're like, oh my gosh, I got a lot of work to do. And it's a kind of pleasurable discovery to have. But I think that might be a way in, if that makes sense, a way to harness. And that's what you get. That's, as I was thinking about my initial run-in with Blake, I just felt him instinctively. I felt that he wanted me to, that his poetry was drawing me into thinking about at a different level, but also feeling about in like this totalizing experience of whatever idea he's pushing. Because he's got the artwork, he's got the language and the poetry. The two go together. He's very, very much in control.
Yeah.
Without being controlling, without sort of twisting. He's drawing you in. And the way, and that's how I get to my poem, I think, which is the Auguries of Innocence, which is fantastic.
And again, so as Paul's studying this, the Auguries of Innocence by Blake is easily found on the internet. Like, have it handy because it's really worth reading.
Yeah, it's a great poem, and I want to tell you why. I'm not going to do a ton of close reading to it, but I think just skipping through several of the different stanzas, and you can go with it. But again, focusing on how you can draw your students in. The one way, this is kind of almost like a Matrix moment, when Morpheus asks you, have you ever noticed the world is weird? Have you ever noticed something's not right? That's kind of what Blake does. He pushes these paradoxes, or he pushes things that conflict one with another, things that appear to go together but are paradoxical. I mean, the title of his most famous collections of Innocence and Experience. These two things you find experience in the innocence, you find innocence in the experience. How do these two things go together? So he's pushing things like this. And I think the reason I chose Auguries of Experience is because if you're trying to draw students into Blake through his paying attention to these conflicts, Auguries of Innocence has a ton of them in it. Opening line is fantastic. To see a world in a grain of sand. All right, we're already in juxtaposition of contrasting concepts.
Yeah.
It's not that hard to grasp, though, to see a world in a grain of sand. And so I'm in, and heaven in a wildflower. I can kind of get that if you've ever appreciated a wildflower, and most of your students have. To hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. A robin redbreast in a cage puts all heaven in a rage. That's gettable. Your students, they don't have to know a ton about poetry to follow
Right.
that thought. Dove houses filled with doves and pigeons shudder hell through all its regions. A dog starved at his master's gate predicts the ruin of the state. Yeah. What does that remind you? That reminded me of the Odyssey, actually. That literally happened in the Odyssey. Oh, a horse misused upon the road calls to heaven for human blood. Each outcry of the hunted hare, a fiber from the brain does tear. A skylark wounded in the wing, a cherubim does cease to sing. So you have these ordinary things. A skylark wounded. How many times does that happen, a day? But then it points to something grand. Its coordinate is metaphysical. The gamecock clipped and armed for fight does the rising sun affright. Every wolf's and lion's howl raises from hell a human soul. He who respects the infant's faith triumphs over hell and death. All right, there's a 20-minute conversation in class.
Yeah.
The child's toys and the old man's reasons are the fruits of the two seasons. There's another 20 minutes. The questioner who sits so sly shall never know how to reply. He who replies to words of doubt doth put the light of knowledge out. What a great apparent paradox. You reply to words of doubt, don't do that. You put the light of capital K knowledge out. The strongest poison ever known came from Caesar's laurel crown. Naught can deform the human race like to the armor's iron. And this goes on and on. There are these images. They're almost couplets of paradoxes, of conflicts, of internal things that go together but aren't what they seem. And in fact, or sometimes they're opposite, or the thing is itself its undoing. And this is the way to beginning to articulate, to, as you said, Jay, to make an object out of your subjective recognitions of things that aren't right in the world. And Blake more than gives you permission to ask those things and to talk about them. But he wants you to pay attention to them. He wants you to live, to see what, instead of solving the tensions of the problems, and we live in an age of solving problems, answering questions, just ask Grok. It can resolve your problems for you, answers your questions, searches the world's knowledge, and will condense all that down into three nice points for you in about 4 seconds. That's the orientation of the world we live in. And Blake is inviting you not to wear those manacles. You get something from that, but you lose something as well. And he pushes students back to paying attention to those tension and those conflicts. And then from that energy, from allowing those things to sit, see what happens. And it's a way out. It's a way to see and to learn and to know in a way that feels like, it's yours and that you've really earned it instead of just copying or going along. So that's the way I would go with trying to draw students into Blake. And it's something, you talk through and reason through, but he's not about reason, really. You can't do that too much because his poems are really about imagination. They're really about the inspiring power of, he could have said that line that is attributed to Einstein. Imagination is more important than knowledge, but he means something I think even more thoroughgoing, than Einstein meant about that, which is imagination is there's a power in imagination that transcends everything that science has discovered, and it's even it's as grand or grander or more powerful. So I think Blake, there's an easy way into Blake through this, and then he's a great doorway into the Romantics, because if this is interesting, exciting to your students, and again with the imagery on the board, it really helps. Then you're in, and you want to know more about who are these Romantics and what. So Blake's wild. He's crazy. Maybe he was insane. Who knows? But what he left behind him is brilliant and compelling.
I think an interesting thing too there, Paul, and that's a poem I need to teach. So thank you for reminding me of it.
Yeah.
And just throwing this out there are some modern poems that are list poems. A friend of mine and a mentor encouraged me to change one of my poems to a list poem. And it was about I was making some comments about what I saw at the Topsfield Fair.
Yeah.
And he said, the strongest things in your poems are the images. So we actually like artfully structured and listed the images, and that was the poem.
Yeah.
And I think in a much more significant way, a lot of the Auguries of Innocence is an artfully constructed, as you said, list of paradoxes. So part of me thinks like if we gave students time with that, there's some obvious sort of takeaways, but to dig under those, lists are specific and they're organized and sequenced in a strategic way.
Okay.
And they also sort of, the camera moves, like some of them are internal, some are external, some are church, state, nature, big, small, near, far. So I think it's like anything. It's like looking at a painting. Like, why is this done this way? Is it a way to honor all the work that went in and all the choices? But, the nice thing is if you spend a little bit of time on Blake, and I have to say, like, I traditionally have not done a great job with the romantics. When you do Brit Lit survey, right, in a high school class, you're in any survey class, Paul, you're admitting what you're giving up. And like, it's very difficult to say, I'm not doing any Victorian novels. I'm not doing any X or Y or Z. So if you're going to hang out with the romantics and do a legit job, there's just some things you're not going to get to. And the wonderful thing about teaching literature in general, but I'm a Brit Lit guy, the options are so infinite. Like I've come to grips with the fact that if I do a really good unit on epic poetry, and I do a good Pride and Prejudice unit, and I do a contemporary poetry unit, and I do some sonnets, and I do, that's fine. Like, that's a nice way to spend time, and I could try to check off every box, but it probably wouldn't be good reading at that point. So
No.
that's like an important teaching thing. We don't really talk enough about the depth versus breadth dynamic and what's okay to give up, and can we live with ourselves after? But
right. And the difference between the tension the students can feel when they feel that you feel like you have to cover this.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But the nice thing is, with romantic poetry, I mean, if you're an English teacher, hopefully you realize like this is just insanely imaginative, crazy stuff, and it's totally worth hanging out with. But if you were to read just London and Auguries of Innocence and spend a day or two on each one, and then say, take a day and get in groups and just talk about and write about how these poems are similar and different.
Yeah.
And because it's cool when they start seeing sort of like how a basketball player has moves, like you pivot right and go left. Yeah. Poets have those, What are Blake's moves? So not just, these are themes he discusses. That's fine. It's a good starting point. But what moves are there? Because these poems are pretty different structurally.
Yeah, they are. And as you pointed out, if you have to cover some things on a list, for a curriculum standard, they're there as well. You can get literary devices done. You can do meter, rhyme scheme. All that work can be
tone, diction, sense. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, it's great. Blake is full of these contrasts. I think not better than, one thing I noticed when I was reading through this, ironically, I think what Blake's trying to get you to do is to think. And I was thinking about this. I remembered when I taught about the Enlightenment, I've read to some advanced students, Immanuel Kant's On Enlightenment. I think it's the name of this. It's a short essay, basically boils down what is, or maybe it's called What is Enlightenment? I think that's the name of it. What is Enlightenment? And he boils it down. And he has a little Latin aphorism, dare to know. Aude sapere. And Blake is not a fan of the Enlightenment. He thinks all this daring to know has reduced, God to this like architect essentially, which is fine, but God is just an architect. He's way more than this. And you see that in the art. Blake is inviting students into or his readers into a completely different perspective. And he's saying the same thing, dare to know, dare to find out. And that's something that's appealing to students, that can be pitched. And Blake pitches it in an ironic and a surprising way. But
I have a poem.
So what are you going to close us out with?
So this is written by a kid named Danny, and he graduated 15 years ago.
Oh, gosh.
And one of the assignments was they did a close reading of a chosen romantic poem. And then I had them write sort of their own iteration of that poem. So he wrote a poem inspired by London by William Blake about the college application process.
All right, here we
go. So it's just called College, as opposed to London. So anyway, This is Danny's poem, College. I ponder through my college list, unsure quite where I'd like to go, and wince as every voice insists my top choice is something I should know. On every trip to every school, on every info session heard, the campus tours, I'm quite a fool. The trip-induced memories are blurred. How uncertainty steals my health, and my guidance counselor counts, as all my mournful parents' wealth will drain from hard-earned bank accounts. But most from wise advice I hear. They're all the same. From every voice vanishes my school-born fears and renders indifferent my college choice.
Gosh. Wow.
Is that good?
There's some nice phrasing in there.
I remember writing like, I just saved you a therapy appointment. This was clearly therapeutic. I said I should have a copay. I should have a copay with this assignment. So he was a cool kid. Yeah. So I thought that would be a little offbeat sharing rather than a professional poem. This is just a kid, you know.
I like that. Inspired by
what it forced him to do, I mean, he's not thinking like Blake. He's just writing about his life. But even he did iambic tetrameter with the rhyme scheme. And that's not easy to do. And it wasn't overly clunky. Like it flowed pretty well.
And no, it had really good flow as well as a contiguous narrative, you know, that works from beginning to end, which is also difficult. And it had that interiority, you know, he's thinking about his own life and reflecting. Blake would be
100%. Yeah, 100%. So I thought you'd get a kick out of that. But I hope people subscribe, but I hope people throw out to us any ideas you have about these poems, about Blake, about romanticism. This is just an awesome period, and Paul alluded to this. If you're teaching teenagers, I think the modern teenage view of the world and largely the modern view of the world was born with these thinkers.
Yeah,
So,
That's right.
It's really interesting for them to interact with the source of probably how a lot of them see the world.
Right. They couldn't articulate it, but they might feel it. You know, they might feel some kinship there. And it's a way in. That's just how I think about it. How are you going to get in? It's a way in. And I think, you know, if it really lands with your class, it may be a way out from a lot of the problems we would all agree on, you know, from today, or that our students are trapped in, and some motivation for getting out. So it's, you know, it's inspiring in that way too.
Yeah, I like that.
That's great. That was great, Jay. Thanks for sharing both of those poems, London and London Revisited, aka College. Those were great to hear. And I hope you found this helpful as a way to teach poetry, motivating to jump into the romantics, and maybe give you some things to think about too, about how to work Blake in and how to teach it as well. So like, subscribe, leave some comments. We'd love to interact with you on what you're doing with poetry in your class and with the romantics in particular. And we'll come back next time with our next episode on the romantics, working our way up to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the romantic novel. So
nice.
All right. Does that cover it?
All right. Very good, Paul.
All right. Thanks a lot, Jay. I appreciate it as always. And we'll see you again next time.
All right. See you later.